our best. It's Wednesday here on The Story, and tonight, $1 billion budget blunder at ODOT. We know money problems at the agency are nothing new, but $1 billion? How it happened. Plus, fireworks in our nation's capital. An Oregon senator takes a pointed question to one of the president's nominees for the State Department.
Is President Trump a Russian asset?
The tense back and forth that followed. But first, I was in federal court this morning as a Vancouver drug trafficker pleaded guilty in the case of a Portland teen's accidental fentanyl overdose death. It's a case we've followed for nearly 3 years now, and it's our big story tonight. It was a Monday morning in March 2022 when 16-year-old Griffin Hoffmann was found unconscious on his bedroom floor.
The first thing I saw was his hand because his dad was holding it, trying to find a pulse, and there was no pulse, and it was just blue.
Investigators later confirmed Kerry Cohen's son overdosed on fentanyl. We sat down with Kerry a few months later, who says her son didn't know what he was taking.
My kid wasn't an addict, you know? He was just doing normal experimentation like any other kid. He was just like a regular teenager.
Weeks after Griffin's death, investigators traced the blue pills found in Griffin's room to 24-year-old Manuel Antonio Souza Espinoza, an alleged third-party drug trafficker in Vancouver. Law enforcement says the fentanyl pills made their way through 2 other dealers before reaching Griffin. Souza Espinoza has been behind bars since his arrest on March 31st, 2022. Nearly 3 years later, inside the federal courthouse in downtown Portland, Souza Espinoza took a plea deal, changing his plea to guilty in exchange for the government to not seek the 20-year mandatory minimum sentence. The 2 charges he faced: conspiracy to distribute and possess with intent to distribute fentanyl that resulted in death of a minor, and possession of a firearm in furtherance of a drug trafficking crime, could have imprisoned him for life if he was handed the maximum sentence. But Wednesday morning, after pleading guilty, lawyers recommended 13 years in prison and supervised release. We reached out to Souza Espinoza's attorney, who said he has no comment at this time.
I mean, it doesn't do anything for me. He obviously did a very bad, selfish, greedy thing, which is he sold poison under the guise of something else and didn't consider that that was not only going to kill people, but might have killed kids, which is, you know, what happened to my son.
Souza Espinoza's large family, including young children, showed up to the hearing. Kerry did too.
He had a lot of family there. That was both surprising and, you know, nice. I mean, I look forward to the sentencing because that means they'll all be there and when I get to talk.
Souza Espinoza did not finish high school, and he is not a U.S. citizen. The judge warned his guilty plea means it's extremely likely he would be deported. Court documents say that's practically inevitable.
I think he made, you know, really terrible choices. He didn't look my kid in the eyes and hand him the drugs. If he had done that, maybe I'd feel differently. And maybe I'll feel differently about the person who did that if and when we go after him.
Meanwhile, Kerry keeps her son's memory alive by sending this message to families.
There's a lot of misunderstanding around all of these horrendous fentanyl deaths that are happening all over the place. And it's a very layered, complicated situation. He was just a 16-year-old experimenting with drugs. That's all that happened, you know. It was one pill. It was one little pill. And he thought he was just gonna, you know, feel good, go to sleep, wake up, go to school the next day. And he had no idea he was gonna die.
Griffin would have turned 19 years old in February. As for Souza Espinoza, his sentencing date is set for June 20th. The judge said even though the recommended sentence is 13 years in prison, she doesn't have to follow that, and he could still face 20 years or life behind bars. No cameras or recording devices are allowed inside federal court, so that's why we didn't show you any of the actual hearing. But I mentioned that Souza Espinoza's family was there. They took up much of the courtroom. He smiled to them when he entered and blew a kiss to the children when he was escorted away. Now, as I sat behind them this morning, I witnessed another family impacted by the crime he committed, his own. I asked his family if they would talk with me. They were angry and said no. They thought the media didn't care about their side of the story. But I believe it's an important one to tell, to show yet another aspect of the deadly fentanyl crisis in the Pacific Northwest. So we'll see if they end up changing their minds about talking either before sentencing or the day it happens in just over 3 months. Today, a freshman Clackamas County commissioner was indicted on 8 felonies related to a months-long investigation that alleges she stole thousands of dollars from a senior citizen and forged the signature of an Oregon state representative. Melissa Fireside pleaded not guilty today in court. And in the last 2 hours, we learned she's taking an extended leave of absence from her position as county commissioner. Fireside defeated incumbent Commissioner Mark Schull in the November election by just over 6,000 votes. The indictment against her claims in September of last year, before the election, she used a computer to steal more than $10,000 from an 83-year-old man. She's also accused of identity theft by falsifying or copying his signature, as well as that of Oregon State Representative April Dobson, whose district covers parts of Clackamas County. The state also says Fireside forged 2 promissory notes totaling $59,000. Representative Dobson's office today told us that she helped Fireside with a loan over the summer and that it was paid back. But then in November, Dobson says police told her that there were issues with the money Fireside used to pay it back. Dobson has since called on Fireside to resign, and so has fellow Clackamas County Commissioner Ben West. County Chair Craig Roberts also responded today, writing, "Under Oregon law, the board does not have the authority to remove an elected commissioner. However, I want to assure everyone that the board is committed to reviewing all available options within its legal authority to uphold the trust of Clackamas County voters and address their concerns." Fireside's next court date is at the end of April, and she's been ordered not to have contact with the man she allegedly stole from or Representative Dobson. Last night, 2 of Oregon's Democratic congresswomen walked out during President Donald Trump's address to Congress. Representatives Andrea Salinas and Maxine Dexter saying they did it in protest of the president. Representative Dexter wrote in a statement, "I refuse to normalize Trump's constitutional crisis. I will loudly fight back. I will relentlessly disrupt. I will unapologetically resist. Tonight, I left the State of the Union because I will not dignify his cruelty, and I want him to know that." And Representative Salinas wrote, "President Trump spewed more lies and continued to ignore the reality that his policies are hurting working families, not helping them. In protest, I decided to leave the House chamber early rather than listen to more false promises from a wannabe dictator. I will not be complicit as the president makes life harder for Oregonians." Oregon's lone Republican member of Congress, Representative Cliff Bentz, posted on social media outlining what President Trump talked about, saying the speech, quote, "reaffirmed the importance of securing our nation's future through strong leadership and action." And how about this one from Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley last night? "Trump and Musk's authoritarian administrative takeover knows no limits. They started by tearing apart the agency in charge of countering our adversaries' influence and strengthening democracy abroad. And now they are gutting staff at the agency that oversees your Social Security checks. This was never about, quote, efficiency." And let's pause on that for a moment tonight regarding the senator's comments on the influence of adversaries and the state of democracy abroad. Senator Jeff Merkley is a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which yesterday morning held a nomination hearing for 3 of President Trump's top State Department nominees. The hearing marked one of the first times that Democratic senators could publicly face Trump nominees and pepper them with questions about the state of affairs between the U.S., Ukraine, and Russia, especially considering that explosive Oval Office meeting last week with Ukraine's president. Senate committee hearings like this rarely see the light of day for the general public, but Senator Merkley did not pull any punches, bringing a question that he says he's heard from constituents here at home. We think the tense back and forth with some classic pivots along the way is worth your time.
I wanted to ask you, Mr. Lundo, is President Trump a Russian asset?
Absolutely not, Senator. He's the President of the United States, duly elected by the American people.
Well, the reason I ask is many people back home have been asking me this question. And they say, if he was an asset, we would see exactly what he's doing now. For example, he proceeded to forward or express from the Oval Office propaganda that has been Russian propaganda, that Ukraine started the war, that Zelensky is a dictator. Second of all, he gave away key things on the negotiating table before the negotiations even started, ensuring U.S. would absolutely oppose any possibility of NATO membership for Ukraine. Third, he's cut off the arms shipments to Ukraine, completely undermining their ability against a massive neighbor next door with short supply lines and huge resources. Fourth, he's undermined the partnership with Europe, which has been essential to security over the last 80 years, a major goal of Putin's. And then he's done everything to discredit and dismean Zelensky on the international stage with the just shameful press conference in which he teamed up with the vice president to attack Zelensky. I can't imagine that if he was a Russian asset, he could do anything more favorable than these 5 points. What else could a Russian asset actually possibly do that Trump hasn't yet done?
Senator, the president has made it absolutely clear that his top priority is to try to bring peace and end an absolutely savage war. I know you're familiar with the savagery. This is turning into World War I style trench warfare now in eastern Ukraine. The president is an exceptionally gifted deal maker. He is probably the only individual in the entire universe that could actually stop this. The president understands, as part of his deal
Well,
making,
let's turn to another of
that
the
you
folks
have to
here.
carrots and
Thank
sticks.
you very much, since you're now off the topic I was raising. Mr. Whitaker, these 5 things that the president has done that are so favorable to Putin and so damaging to Ukraine and to our partnership with Europe, do you approve of them?
Well, Senator, thanks for that question. I'm just going to have to politely disagree with you on those 5 things and the way you've framed them. You know, the war in Ukraine would have never happened if President Trump was president in 2022. The war in Ukraine happened because of Joe Biden's weakness after his
I don't think
withdrawal
that was
from
the question I
Afghanistan.
asked, but maybe you could some other time go on television and express those points of view. But do you mind just answering the question I asked? Do you agree with the 5 things that President Trump has done, starting with him expressing Russian propaganda from the Oval Office?
Well, you know, again, as I mentioned to your colleague, I am not here to assign labels. We're in the middle of a very important peace negotiation.
Okay, thank you. I do hope that we have an administration that works to get the very best deal for Ukraine, but what a Russian asset would do would be to work to get the very best deal for Russia, and that appears to be exactly what Donald Trump is trying to accomplish.
Now, I know we don't touch on national politics all that often, but it's tough to ignore at this point. So what do you think about the senator's questions and the answers he was given? Let us know. Email the story at kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail 503-226-5090 or hit us up on social media. Now, while we're on the topic of the federal government, multiple reports say the Federal Housing and Urban Development Programs, or HUD, are likely to face major cuts here in the Pacific Northwest. The Oregonian reports the Portland office could be cut in half, with 20 or more people losing their jobs. And federal sources told our Seattle affiliate the HUD office there could lose around 150 jobs. HUD's Region 10 includes Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. Sources tell our affiliate that the Region 10 office is the only regional office in the country slated to close, with a field office expected to stay open in Alaska. The agency's essential duties include expanding homeownership, increasing access to affordable housing, fighting housing discrimination, and tackling the many issues surrounding homelessness. Washington Senator Patty Murray wrote to the Secretary of HUD, quote, "Gutting HUD's workforce will inevitably lead to costly delays and many housing projects will fall apart completely, only making our current housing crisis worse." Of course, we'll be following this to see what ends up happening and how it could impact funding and housing efforts here at home. Well, coming up next on The Story, we've spent a lot of time talking about the budget issues for the city of Portland and Multnomah County, but another local agency recently revealed a massive budget mistake. And by massive, I mean a $1 billion blunder. Details when The Story returns. The Oregon Department of Transportation, or ODOT, has big-time budget problems, and recently we learned of a $1 billion hole, yes, billion, because the agency made, wait for it, an accounting error. and a pretty big one. ODOT's assistant director had the unpleasant task of going before lawmakers to explain how exactly they thought they had $1 billion more than they actually did. It came down, he said, to a tool they used to forecast funding. That made it look like they had a lot more federal money in the bank than they actually do. It's apparently because that money is reimbursed after the fact, but the model did not take that into consideration.
It translated that into immediate federal reimbursements in the budget rather than federal reimbursements at some later date. So as a result, the cash flow model, looking at this mix of projects over time that was heavily front-loaded, projected a very large amount of federal reimbursement in the 23-25 biennium that was actually well beyond the amount of federal funding that is available to ODOT over that period of time, because our federal funds are constrained. Some of it would come in later, but we were projecting it in the 23-25 biennium.
ODOT told the Oregon Transportation Commission about the problem in late 2023, and in January of last year, the commission released an audit on it. It showed that ODOT thought it had a budget of $5.9 billion, but $1.1 billion of it was federal funding it had not yet received. Apparently, no one had checked to see how the projected budget lined up with the actual revenue it had. Lawmakers on the Joint Transportation Committee were not thrilled to hear about it last week.
I'm totally disappointed and just cannot believe what I'm hearing. Because more importantly is that you're telling us that through this whole process, we're putting it into a computer and letting them do the reconciliation. My question is, don't you have any reconciliation process? I see the recommendation that you do reconcile, but we've gone, you say, decades doing this type of modeling.
We're told ODOT has been monitoring their spending for this biennium since the problem was discovered in late 2023. And that spending has been well below what it could have been, with an extra billion that simply didn't exist.
We're currently about $800 million below. We project that we'll probably be about $1 billion below, which happens to coincide with the amount of extra federal revenue that we overestimated.
But there are some projects that will certainly be put on the shelf because of this budget blunder. They did not specify which ones, but warned there will be delays. ODOT says they've already adjusted their method for forecasting federal revenue. The audit recommends exploring alternatives to the budget modeling system being used. Well, one of the hallmarks of this year's legislative session in Salem, a transportation funding package. No details on that have been made public just yet, but there are other ideas being floated that could affect your wallet if you drive. One of them, a new tire tax. The revenue from the tax would support both rail travel and the environment. You can bet not everyone is on board. Catherine Cook brings us highlights from the bill's first public hearing.
$25 million. It's what lawmakers estimate House Bill 3362, the 4% tire excise tax, would bring the state every year. Half that revenue would go to help fish and wildlife. The other half would help Amtrak Cascades expand their rail service. While not a sales tax, customers would likely absorb the cost, which on average would be $40 to $70 for a set of new tires.
We the people do not need new taxes. We need relief and the ability to keep more of our hard-earned money for our families.
Views on the bill varied during a public hearing before the Joint Committee on Transportation Tuesday. Committee Chair Senator Chris Gorsuch of Gresham sponsored the bill.
We've been thinking for a long time about the impacts that vehicles have in general on things like salmon, wildlife crossings.
Tax revenue from the bill would fund stormwater treatment technology to remove toxic tire pollutants that threaten coho salmon. It would also fund wildlife crossing infrastructure on Oregon highways. Statistics show each year in the state there are more than 7,000 crashes between cars and animals.
I think all of us, unfortunately, have probably either come close or actually hit a deer, an elk, or something, usually at night. A lot of times we're with our families in the car. It is in the public interest to solve this problem.
Some critics of the bill could appreciate how taxing tires might relate to those mitigation efforts.
We got really stuck on the part that says we're going to tax tires to support rail. Feels a little bit like a beef tax to encourage people to buy more chicken.
Gorsuch believes it's all related, especially when it comes to traveling statewide.
We want to give them options other than simply driving a car.
In Salem, Catherine Cook, KGW News.
Well, it is that time of year again. The KGW Great Food Drive kicked off this week. Our goal this year is to collect enough donations to provide more than 1.2 million meals for local people and families in need. You can help right now by giving online at kgw.com/fooddrive. A $10 donation can provide as many as 30 meals. And all this week, Pacific Foods will match the first $10,000 donated. We want to thank local Toyota dealers, Pacific Office Automation, Rivermark Community Credit Union, and Safeway for supporting this year's food drive. And that is the end of our show, folks. Thanks so much for watching. The good stuff is coming your way next. And don't forget, everyone has a story to tell. If you ever miss an episode of The Story at 6:30, we re-air the episode at 8:30 and 10:30 p.m. on our TV app, KGW Plus. Download it right now. It's free on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. In the meantime, have a great Wednesday night. It's hump day. We're almost there. I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.